I was on the phone with someone, and they had been offered a book contract to write a book about all of Buddhism. And what they said was, but they only gave me 40,000 words. And I said, 40,000 words? Oh, that's either way too many or way too few. And they said, way too many. And I said, well, you only need 7. Everything changes. Everything is connected. Pay attention. All Buddhism in 7 words. And there are many things missing, but they can all be unfolded from those words. And so, the word compassion is not in the 7, but everything is connected, is the source of our compassion, the non-separation of self and other. And it took me several years before I realized you only need 2. Pay attention. Because if you just pay attention, everything else reveals itself.
Welcome to the Peacemakers Podcast. I'm Jim.
And I am Geoff. In this episode, I sit down with our friend, the poet, Jane Hirshfield.
Jane has been publishing for decades. Her poems have traveled widely, and so has her voice as teacher and essayist.
What you'll hear is less a formal interview and more a shared exploration. I selected a few of her poems from her most recent book, The Asking, New and Selected Poems, which she published in 2023, and we let the conversation wander from there.
Laughter and the kind of ease that happens when 2 people really listen to each other.
Jane and I touched on questioning, on surprise, on witness, and on what it means to listen.
And all of that came through the poems themselves.
So here it is, my conversation with Jane Hirshfield. The first theme was questioning, which is fundamental in Zen practice. It's what we do. And that's related to not knowing, the first tenet, of course. And Jane, I pulled one, and I'll be interested to say if you think this is apt, from your newer collection, Counting, New Year's Morning, What Powers Yet Remain to Me.
Well, that is certainly the perfect place to start a conversation about questioning and about this book, because the book takes its title from the poem's last words. And the poem is very much an act of relationship to questions. So every New Year's morning, I try to start the year writing a poem, so that it's very hard because you can only do one thing first. And, for many, many years, I sat zazen first thing, New Year's morning. Well, now I start the year writing a poem, which is not so different than zazen in that it is an act of permeability and concentration and openness to what is, in which you try to have the narrow self step out of the way of the large and the connected. Counting New Year's morning, what powers yet remain to me? The world asks, as it asks daily, and what can you make, can you do to change my deep broken, fractured? I count this first day of another year, what remains. I have a mountain, a kitchen, 2 hands. Can admire with 2 eyes the mountain, actual, recalcitrant, shuffling its pebbles, sheltering foxes and beetles. Can make black-eyed peas and collards. Can make from last year's late ripening persimmons a pudding. Can climb a stepladder, change the bulb in a track light. For years, I woke each day first to the mountain, then to the question. The feet of the new sufferings followed the feet of the old, and still they surprised. I brought salt, brought oil to the question, brought sweet tea, brought postcards and stamps, for years, each day, something. Stone did not become apple. War did not become peace. Yet joy still stays joy. Sequins stay sequins, words still bespangle, bewilder. Today I woke without answer. The day answers, unpockets a thought as though from a friend. Don't despair of this falling world, not yet. Didn't it give you the asking? So yeah, that has, questioning and not knowing. The not knowing was very literal. I started the poem that morning, but I didn't finish it for, 2 or 3 weeks because I actually didn't know what the answer was going to be to this world's question, and what can you do to change my deep, broken, fractured? This is an unanswerable question. And what finally came as answer was a question, which is so often how practice proceeds, I think.
Keeps us moving forward, doesn't it?
Yeah.
As you read, I marked the feet of the new sufferings followed the feet of the old, and still they surprised. I was just struck by it because in that line, we don't get freed from those sufferings. We move from the old ones to the new ones.
Right. And, surprise is really interesting. I've thought a lot about surprise in a number of different ways. I've written in the second book of essays, 10 Windows, there's a whole chapter on, it's called Poetry and the Constellation of Surprise. And I don't think I put this in that chapter, but the neuroscience study of putting people, where they could look at their brain waves and just ringing a bell every so often. And normal people, eventually they stop hearing the bell. They acclimate to it, and the brain just doesn't register anything when it rings again. But when they put meditating monks in the study, they heard the bell every time. And, this is, I think, a relationship to, or a comment on the beginner's mind of contemplative awareness, that you don't acclimate. I am shocked every single time I face, not only the world's suffering, but that some people are actually choosing to perpetuate it. I just never get over the surprise of it.
Yeah.
I don't get used to it. And I wonder, is this naivete or is it practice? Who knows? But it is my experience, the continual shock. And then because I am so shocked and because I am so saddened, having to face it over and over again. And a lot of that facing happens for me in poems. Poems are how I find a way to not despair, to feel the sharpness of my perplexity and disappointment and grief, and to feel the sharpness of the world's sufferings, but not give up. Each poem that is written in that particular terrain is a refinding of a way to keep the heart and the hope of practice mind awake and alive, to open your eyes to the next day, which human beings do need to do.
The next one we talked about was Be Still, which is really part of, if not all of, the first tenet of not knowing. I picked After Long Silence.
Here's After Long Silence. Politeness fades. A small anchovy gleam, leaving the upturned pot in the dish rack after the moon has wandered out of the window. One of the late freedoms, there in the dark. The leftover soup put away as well. Distinctions matter. Whether a goat's quiet face should be called noble or indifferent, the difference between a right rigor and pride. The untranslatable thought must be the most precise. Yet words are not the end of thought. They are where it begins.
Yes, I very much like this one. And I marked in my book, the untranslatable thought must be the most precise.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's precious. I really love that. The next tenet is bearing witness, and one of the ways that we express this is, regard the joys and the pain, the suffering, the beauty and the horror of the universe, and don't turn away. Don't turn away. Jane and I were talking a little bit earlier, and there's one that I had in a different category that she thought was best under this heading. This is a day beginning with seeing the International Space Station and a full moon over the Gulf of Mexico and all its invisible fishes.
So this bears witness to a lot, this poem. It bears witness to everything from, the asteroid hitting the Earth and taking out the dinosaurs, to the geomorphology of how the land in Florida was made. The civil war in Syria is in it, in a very oblique way, not named. The Boston Marathon terrorist act is in it. And it ends with something that had been going on for years when I wrote this poem, and is still going on now, and it has been years since I wrote this poem, which is the crisis of the refugees in the Mediterranean. So there's a lot of witness bearing. Okay, so I will say the long title again and then read the poem. Day beginning with seeing the International Space Station and a full moon over the Gulf of Mexico and all its invisible fishes. None of this had to happen. Not Florida, not the ibis's beak, not water, not the horseshoe crab's empty body, and not the living starfish. Evolution might have turned left at the corner and gone down another street entirely. The asteroid might have missed. The seams of limestone need not have been susceptible to sand and mangroves. The radio might have found a different music. The hips of one man and the hips of another might have stood beside each other on a bus in Aleppo and recognized themselves as long-lost brothers. The key could have broken off in the lock, and the nail can refused its lid. I might have been the fish the brown pelican swallowed. You might have been the way the moon kept not setting, long after we thought it would, long after the sun was catching inside the low wave curls coming in at a certain angle. The light might not have been eaten again by its moving. If the unbearable were not weightless, we might yet buckle under the grief of what hasn't changed yet. Across the world, a man pulls a woman from the water from which the leapt-from overfilled boat has entirely vanished. From the water pulls one child, another. Both are living, and both will continue to live. This did not have to happen. No part of this had to happen. I had been for 5 years taking some political action every day of my life. Whether it was consequential or inconsequential didn't matter. What mattered was that I did something every day, whether it is foolish and empty And yet, here we are, Zen peacemakers, hoping that by what we do, something will ripple out into the world. Bearing witness is taking action. Feeling the suffering of others as one's own is a kind of action. If a person meets a person who looks at them with compassion for half a moment on the street, their day might be changed. Their behavior might be changed. Similarly, if a person meets with somebody for half a moment on the street who looks at them and reels backwards, their day will be changed. What they do will be changed. And so we try to live within, the precepts and the paramitas and the requests to be permeable to one another, and the request for some fundamental sense of wishing others well. It's so simple. Yeah.
Well, I think it challenges folks sometimes, 3-tenet practice, because the question inevitably comes up. Well, so what are you actually going to do to make the world a better place? And I love what you just said, because merely the act of witnessing, of paying attention, is transformative.
Yes.
It's subtle. It may not be evident all the time, and it may not even evidence itself for a while, maybe years.
It feels to me, just as, you can't be a poet if you don't love silence. You can't take an action that will be, what in the language of the precepts and paramitas would be, right action, if you aren't capable of taking no action. The ability to sit in non-action is what allows time and intention and vow to enter into that first impulse, which might not be coming from large mind.
Right.
There is no better way to do harm than to believe with absolute certainty. This goes back to not knowing also. People who are sure they are right do the most damage in the world, because they think you can do anything in the service of what you believe is right. And if you don't know, and if you have doubt, and if you abide in your uncertainty, that might stop you from taking that any means in the service of the end, very not right action. I learned so much, those 3 years, especially in the monastery, sitting on the zafu, no matter what came through, whether it was physical pain or emotional discomfort or exhaustion, learning that you can just stay on the zafu and eventually something will change. That is one of the great, deep aquifer resources of my life, having learned that lesson over and over and over again. Because when you're on the zafu, you won't do anything that will cause karma. You won't, if you're angry, you won't say anything hurtful to someone else.
Right, yeah.
If you're, in despair, you won't do anything hurtful towards yourself. You just stay on the zafu. So it is the resource that underlies, I think, action, which comes from, everything changes everything is connected, pay attention, rather than the impulse to, oh my God, I've just been insulted, I must strike back.
Yeah. That reactivity, right?
Yeah. So let's get to another poem.
Yes. The one I actually chose under this bearing witness category, or the look and don't turn away, is Let Them Not Say.
Yeah.
I don't know if that works for you or not.
That works entirely for me. Yeah. This was a poem that, having written it, it changed my life. I had to live up to it. I wrote it years before I published it because I felt like it had some work to do in the world. And I held it until there was a chance for it to do it. I just never sent it out until the opportunity came for it to do its work. So the poem is looking at us from the point of view of the future. It is thinking about people in the future, thinking about us. And you don't have to read it that way. You can read it as present tense, but what I had in mind was 150 years from now, if there is anyone alive to read poems, they will know how we got through this pivot point of, I had the crisis of climate and biosphere in mind when I wrote it. But it went on to do some other work. So here's the poem. Let them not say. Let them not say we did not see it. We saw. Let them not say we did not hear it. We heard. Let them not say they did not taste it. We ate. We trembled. Let them not say it was not spoken, not written. We spoke. We witnessed with voices and hands. Let them not say they did nothing. We did not enough. Let them say, as they must say something, a kerosene beauty. It burned. Let them say we warmed ourselves by it, read by its light, praised, and it burned. So as I said, I wrote that with the crisis of the biosphere and climate in mind. But this poem hopes to make itself unneeded and incomprehensible in the future. That if in fact we do enough, people 100 years from now will say, oh, what was she so worried about? What was she so worried about? The poem wants to write itself out of being meaningful. It's a spell against its own existence in a way. But anyhow, I held the poem. It changed me. Having written it, I had been, engaged and an activist to some degree all my life. After writing this, I became more of one. I felt like I had to live up to its own imperative. So I held it, and then finally I was asked by the Academy of American Poets that I had been, a chancellor for, if I had a poem for New Year's Day. And I wrote them back and I said, well, I don't think I have a New Year's Day poem for you, but I have a poem that I feel would be awfully good to run on the day of Trump's inauguration. And I don't know if you would agree with that, but here's the poem. You let me know what you think. They have, a whole staff of younger people with, sharp sensibilities. And, half an hour later, they wrote me back and said, absolutely. And I was told later it went more viral than any poem a day they had ever until then put up, by multiples. So it was published as a political poem. We saw, we heard, we tried, we spoke, we didn't do enough. And then it has returned to being a poem about the biosphere more recently. So it's become almost, in a small way, a kind of anthem for the climate movement.
Jane, am I hearing a vow in here also?
Oh, yes.
At the end, I'm feeling, sort of let them not say, yes, we did these things, but even just in a kerosene beauty, I'm just the stillness of that, and I'm hearing and feeling a vow.
Thank you. You are a very fine reader to not only feel it, but be able to name it and say it. Yeah. The intentions of praise. That is a vow that I had to make. Again, it is one of the curatives to paralysis and despair, is the vow to recognize that the beauty is there amidst the darkness. And that if we can find the slightest glimmer of it, we will remain in love with the world. And that, of course, is the Bodhisattva's vow. You cannot have a wish for all beings' well-being if you are not in love with the world.
Our next category, we were talking about taking action. The words that I wrote down when we met and I made notes, was step forward, which I really like as another way to express taking action. What are you going to do?
Yeah.
And I don't know why this struck me, but I picked like others.
Bless your heart. I love that poem, and I've never been sure that other people actually care about it at all. Interesting that it's, see, this is what you said at the beginning. Maybe I'll surprise Jane with some of my choices. And you are regularly surprising me by picking this to speak to this subject. Okay. Like others. In the end, I was like others, a person, sometimes embarrassed, sometimes afraid. When fire was shouted, some ran toward it, some away. I neck deep among them. So, the main story of this poem is simply that, sometimes I've run away from the fire, but sometimes I have run toward it. And this is, in one sense, again, it's not needed for the poem, but one of the reasons that we, do poetry readings and have conversations and things is people get to hear the gossip behind the poem. So when I lived at Tassajara was the first time that the monastery was surrounded by a forest fire. The Ventana Cone fire that happened in 1977 was, at that time, it's long been surpassed, but at that time it was the largest fire California had ever seen. And I was one of the very small group that ended up going back in and being there to save the buildings. There was a much more dramatic reoccurrence in 2008, which is the story is held in the book Fire Monks. There were only 5 people then. Yeah. With my generation of saving Tassajara from a forest fire, there were 14 practitioners and 3 Forest Service people helping. So we set back, we cut fire line, we cleaned we did all the actions. And then just as the fire was approaching, you set a backfire, and that was what saved the buildings. But I would not have known in advance that I was a person who, given the last second chance to go back in and fight a forest fire, that I would race to the car. But there are other things I have ran away from.
Well, that, when we talk about this third tenet of taking action, we always include, it might, as I said earlier, it might mean also doing nothing.
Right.
And you really speak to that in these last few lines. When fire was shouted, some ran toward it, some ran away. And then your last line, doesn't help us with which one of those groups you are in. I neck deep among them. Neck deep is total immersion, completely committed, all in.
Yes.
You know, everything's burned up, to use your fire. But with which group?
Both.
Both and all, right.
Absolutely, because I am like others. Because I am like all other human beings. I am in both groups. I want to give you a short earlier poem about stepping forward, which again, it has to do with this thing of, it doesn't matter whether we think something's going to work or not. It's just the doing anything. So I wrote this poem. This is long ago. This is a much earlier poem, decades old. And I have come to think of it as the mantra against, when you find yourself muttering to yourself, there's nothing I can do. There's nothing I can do. This is changing everything. I was walking again in the woods. A yellow light was sifting all I saw. Willfully, with a cold heart, I took a stick, lifted it to the opposite side of the path. There, I said to myself, that's done now, brushing one hand against the other to clean them of the tiny fragments of bark. Behind that poem was the idea, which was then new, now it's, long familiar, of the butterfly effect. And, the butterfly effect is this thing that, came out from science of if a butterfly flaps its wings in Asia, it might create a sandstorm in Africa 7 months later. It's the idea that small changes have huge repercussions, which we cannot know what they are. And so, picking up this stick and moving it to the other side of the path, I don't know what I'd change. I don't know what butterfly effect might come from that, but it was what I could do, with a cold heart, willfully. Okay, I'm going to change something.
You altered the course of human history.
Yeah, well, it gives the poem its modest title, Changing Everything. Because you change anything, you have changed.
That's terrific. Everything. That's terrific. And Jane and I had talked about a category called fail or failure or failing, which I puzzled over a bit. And my first note when I was, looking for poems was, these are hard to find. I can't find any. And then I found 3. But I'll just name one of these. And I think I mentioned it to you before. The egg had frozen an accident. I thought of my life.
Okay. Yeah, I was stunned and then I thought for a second, I went, oh, that's pretty good. It's also one of the very few poems, I'm usually so serious. This poem's a little less. Okay. So I was staying somewhere. They needed someone to put the chickens in at night after, before dark. Where I was staying, I had a stove, I had a refrigerator, and I thought, I've never eaten a fresh egg in my life. I'm going to take one of these eggs and, and see what a fresh egg tastes like from a chicken whose name I know. Well, it turned out the refrigerator was running a bit cold, which I had not known. So that led to this poem. The egg had frozen, an accident. I thought of my life. The egg had frozen, an accident. I thought of my life. I heated the butter anyhow. The shell peeled easily. Inside, it looked both translucent and boiled. I moved it around in the pan. It melted, the whites first clearing to liquid, then turning solid and white again, like good laundry. The yolk kept its yolk shape. Not fried, not scrambled. In the end, it was cooked. With pepper and salt, I ate it. My life that resembled it ate it. It tasted like any other wrecked thing, eggish and tender, a banquet.
a perfect poach. Yes, lovely. Yeah.
Thank you.
Our last category was listen or listening. Listen. And what I picked, and again, I hope this is good. All evening, each time I started to say it.
Wow. This is why I love letting other people choose what I read, is because there's nothing in this book I don't believe in. It's a new and selected poems. I only selected poems that still have, meaning for me, and had to leave out some poems that had meaning for me, because even though it's a very big book, it couldn't be endless. Okay. This was a conversation. It's a dinner party. Again, giving you the gossip. In Port Townsend, Washington, where I was teaching at a writers' conference, and the founder of Copper Canyon Press, Sam Hamill, lived there, had a party, not least because Denise Levertov was there, the great English poet and the great poet of engaged action. And we'd never met, and she wanted to meet me. So it was a very lively dinner, it was a table of writers. Everybody had a lot to say. So yeah, all evening, each time I started to say it. All evening, each time I started to say it, something would interrupt. It was not a thought so very large. It could, in fact, have slipped through any window, cracked open a bit for air. Yet each time I started to say it at that table, someone else would speak. The moment would pass. After the 5th time this happened, I began to be amused. Runt of the litter thought. Unable to get to the tit? Then suddenly wanted to lift it up, to feed it an eyedropper's measure of mare's milk, some warmed sugar water, a little colostrum of badger. It suddenly seemed to me the kind of thought, not large, on which a life might turn. There are many such, unheard, unspoken. Their blind eyes open and close, the almost audible valves of their hearts. But all evening, each time I started to say it, something would interrupt. The moment would pass.
But you still heard it.
I heard it, and it was such an interesting experience. We've all been there, you think you have something to say and you just never manage to say it. I heard a lot of other very interesting things that people did say, but we hear those thoughts, and some of them might change a life. And those are, when I'm by myself and I'm not interrupted and I have the time, those are the source seeds of poems. You have some thought, you hear some phrase, you listen. So much for me, writing is not talking. Writing a poem is listening. And the poem says itself from within. I had to be very strict with myself when I entered Zen practice, because if I had ever allowed myself to write a poem on the Zafu, I would never have meditated. And so I really had to never write poems while practicing Zazen, or I would never have practiced Zazen. And this is why it has come to feel to me there are 2 kinds of listening. There is the listening of meditation, which in Soto Zen is wordless. And there is the listening of writing poems, which comes in language, in words, and in the music and tone and perceptions that precede words, but then enter into them.
Spending time with Jane was a reminder of how poems can hold so much humor, sorrow, action, and silence.
And how a good conversation can bring these poems to life in new ways.
We're grateful that you joined us in listening.
Thank you for being here with us on the Peacemakers Podcast.
And if you'd like to support this work, subscribe to the podcast or become a member of the Zen Peacemakers.
You'll find more at www.zenpeacemakers.org.
We'll be back again in 2 weeks with another episode.
Until then, thank you for listening.
The Peacemakers Podcast is a production of Zen Peacemakers, an international organization whose mission is to realize our oneness and relieve suffering through contemplative social action. You can find the full video recording of this podcast and more at www.zenpeacemakers.org and go to our media library.